Could a simple mistake really turn into an aviation disaster? More than 140 passengers aboard Northwest Flight 188 thought they were on just another ordinary journey, until the plane lost all contact for 77 minutes, overshooting its destination by more than 240 kilometers. The media claimed that the two pilots were distracted, using their personal laptops in the cockpit, forgetting the very duty they were trusted with. But the truth behind Northwest Airlines Flight 188, could it really be that simple? On October 21, 2009, at San Diego International Airport in California, one of the busiest airports in the United States, operating with just a single runway yet handling up to 25 million passengers a year, a flight was preparing for takeoff. Flight NWA 188 was scheduled to depart from San Diego and head to Minneapolis, Minnesota, with an estimated flight time of about 3 hours. The aircraft was an Airbus A320-212 delivered to Northwest Airlines in December 2001. It was powered by two CFM56-5A3 engines manufactured by CFM International, one of the most widely used engine models for narrow-body jets in the early 2000s. On board were 154 people in total, 149 passengers and 5 crew members, including 2 pilots and 3 flight attendants. The captain, Timothy B. Cheney, and the first officer, Richard I. Cole, were both seasoned aviators with years of professional flying experience. At 2:40 p.m. local time, from the control tower at San Diego International Airport, air traffic control cleared NWA 188 for takeoff as planned. At 5:01 p.m. Central Time, the A320 rolled down the runway and lifted into the sky, beginning its journey northeast toward Minneapolis. During the early stage of the flight, everything seemed perfectly normal. The aircraft gradually climbed to its cruising altitude and settled smoothly onto its pre-assigned route. A sense of calm and absolute safety filled the cabin. By 6:30 p.m., about an hour and a half after takeoff, Flight NWA 188 had already passed over Denver, Colorado, completing more than a third of its planned route. At that moment, a flight attendant approached the cockpit, knocked on the door, and spoke through the interphone to let the pilots know that their meal was ready. Hearing that, the captain opened the cockpit door, took the meal tray, and took a brief moment to leave his seat for the restroom, temporarily handing over control to the first officer. But in the short window while the captain was away, the first officer received a call from air traffic control, setting off a chain of events that would soon lead to a tense situation in the skies. Northwest 188, contact Denver Center on frequency 125.9. Contacting Denver Center on 125.9. Roger, Northwest 188, the first officer replied. He then dialed the new frequency into one of the aircraft's VHF radios on the control panel. However, during the process, a small but critical mistake occurred. Instead of entering 125.9, the correct frequency for Denver Center, he accidentally tuned into a Winnipeg, Canada dispatch frequency, a region hundreds of miles away and completely unrelated to their current airspace. The radio gave no warning of the error. To him, it all felt routine. Punch in the numbers, make the call. Good evening, Denver Center. This is Northwest 188, maintaining flight level 370. In aviation, VHF frequencies typically contain 5 or 6 digits, and entering 1 or 2 digits incorrectly isn't uncommon. Normally, such an error causes no real harm. The cockpit goes quiet. There's no response, and after a few minutes, the crew simply double-checks the setting. But this time, things were different. At 37,000 feet, Flight 188 was still picking up radio chatter from other aircraft talking to Winnipeg. Even though Winnipeg couldn't hear the first officer, the radio signals from other planes were still coming through the cockpit speakers, making both pilots believe they were still tuned to the right frequency. No one performed any checks, and the first officer simply went back to what he was doing. A few minutes later, the captain returned to the cockpit after a quick trip to the restroom.
Anything new? Nothing. Everything's normal.
The first officer replied, and just like that, the critical mistake went unnoticed. The captain settled back into his seat, put on his headset, and heard the familiar hum of radio traffic, the kind of steady, reassuring sound he'd heard on hundreds of flights before. No warnings, no reminders, no signs of trouble, and it was precisely that false sense of calm that allowed the serious error to go undetected. According to standard operating procedure, whenever one pilot leaves and returns to the cockpit, the other is supposed to brief them on anything that changed during that time, the current radio frequency, any new navigation instructions, and the status of communication with air traffic control. But this time, the first officer didn't mention that he had switched to a new frequency, or that he hadn't received any response from ATC as a result. The captain resumed his seat under the illusion that everything was exactly as it had been before he left. After the first call received no response, due to the wrong frequency being entered, the first officer didn't try to contact ATC again. In reality, not getting an immediate radio reply isn't unusual. Sometimes pilots wait a few minutes before trying again, especially if they can still hear other aircraft transmissions on the same channel. But this time, the silence didn't last just a few minutes, it stretched on for over an hour. When the captain returned to the cockpit, a series of mandatory security steps had to be followed. Unlocking the door, entering the access code, confirming identity. That brief moment of procedure and distraction disrupted the usual rhythm inside the cockpit, and it's very likely the first officer simply lost track, forgetting that he'd never actually received a response from ATC. By 6:50 p.m., once both pilots were settled back in their seats, the conversation shifted to another topic: the airline's new electronic flight scheduling system, a recent change that had frustrated many pilots. The first officer opened his personal laptop, demonstrating the new interface to the captain as he worked through it, while the captain also powered up his own computer to review related issues. At that time, the A320 was flying with a strong tailwind, reaching a ground speed of about 185 km per hour faster than planned. The navigation display had been set to its maximum range, which made airport waypoints and navigational data appear tiny and cluttered, difficult to read and largely irrelevant. As a result, the flight crew couldn't easily determine their exact position and gradually lost their sense of distance and situational awareness. Because of this, the fact that they had already flown past Minneapolis, their final destination, did not immediately appear on the cockpit display. Meanwhile, at Denver Air Traffic Control Center, a new shift had just taken over, but they were never informed that flight NWA 188 had lost contact. As a result, no one took any action, assuming the A320 was still communicating normally with the next control sector. Back at Northwest Airlines Operations Center, the dispatch team noticed that the aircraft had been out of contact for far too long and decided to send an urgent ACARS message, a text-based communication system used between ground control and the cockpit. On some modern aircraft, ACARS messages are accompanied by a distinct alert chime. But unfortunately, the A320 operating that day only displayed a small indicator light, tucked away on the instrument panel, which stayed illuminated for just 30 seconds, with no audible alert at all. As a result, the critical message went completely unnoticed by anyone in the cockpit. Everything still seemed perfectly normal. The radio was alive with chatter from other aircraft. The plane held steady at 37,000 feet, with no warnings, no turbulence, nothing out of the ordinary. No one in the cockpit realized they had already flown more than 150 miles, about 240 kilometers, past their destination, all while believing they were in full control. And that, the eerie calm in the midst of such a serious mistake, was the most unsettling part of the entire incident. By 8:14 p.m. Central Time, passengers in the cabin began to murmur, noticing the flight was taking longer than expected. The flight attendants also sensed that something wasn't right. One of them decided to call the cockpit to check on the situation.
Captain, The passengers are asking if we're about to land soon.
Startled, the captain looked up from his laptop and glanced at the navigation display in front of him.
Wait a second, let me check.
Within seconds, both pilots fell silent. The navigation screen clearly showed that they had flown past Minneapolis and were now over Eau Claire, Wisconsin, roughly 240 kilometers, 150 miles, east of their intended destination. They quickly tuned back to the Minneapolis ARTCC frequency, attempting to re-establish contact. Minneapolis Center. This is Northwest 188, we're near Eau Claire. Requesting to re-establish communication. The situation on the ground had reached a breaking point. Air traffic controllers had been unable to reach the flight for over an hour. And both the FAA and NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, were on high alert, moments away from scrambling F-16 fighter jets to intercept the A320, fearing it might have been hijacked. So when Northwest 188 suddenly reappeared on the radio, the possibility of a hijacking couldn't be ruled out. To verify control of the aircraft, the controllers instructed the pilots to perform a series of radar identification maneuvers, deliberate turns at cruising altitude, to prove that the aircraft was indeed under pilot control, and that the transponder signal was authentic, not a spoofed target. Northwest 188, make a left turn and maintain flight level 370. Roger, left turn at 37,000 feet. Northwest 188. The Airbus A320 executed the maneuver flawlessly, a clear sign that the flight crew was in full control and that there was no threat inside the cockpit. Once verification was complete, air traffic control cleared the flight to return to Minneapolis. At 9:04 p.m., Northwest Flight 188 finally touched down safely at Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport, more than an hour behind schedule. No one was injured, but that night, the entire U.S. aviation industry learned a lesson it would not soon forget. During the official investigation led by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, Captain Timothy B. Cheney and First Officer Richard I. Cole admitted that they had been reviewing their personal schedules on a laptop inside the cockpit at the exact time the flight lost contact with air traffic control, a serious violation of aviation safety regulations. According to Northwest Airlines policy, the use of personal electronic devices in the cockpit while operating an aircraft is strictly prohibited. When investigators asked whether they had fallen asleep during the period of lost communication, a theory widely speculated by experts, both pilots firmly denied it. However, verification was nearly impossible, as the cockpit voice recorder only stored the last 30 minutes of audio before engine shutdown. This meant there was no recording from the crucial hour when the aircraft was radio silent. Just days after the incident, the Federal Aviation Administration took swift action, revoking both pilots' licenses, the harshest penalty possible, even before the investigation was formally concluded. The Northwest 188 incident served as a stark reminder that aviation safety must always come first. A single moment of distraction or a minor procedural lapse in the cockpit can lead to potentially catastrophic consequences. Fortunately, this time no one was hurt, but the event underscored a timeless truth. Technology can assist pilots, but it can never replace human focus, discipline, and responsibility. Every flight carries its own lesson, and Flight 188 left behind a clear message. Safety is not a matter of luck, but the result of professionalism.